ever since the shroud first really appears in history, there's been controversy about it, and there have been questions about its authenticity.
Nobody expected this to happen, but the latest study on the Shroud of Turin has revealed a biological mystery that science cannot explain away. Researchers have identified complex DNA sequences embedded in the linen, and a massive portion of it is not human.
The Shroud of Turin is a burial cloth that's imprinted with what many believe is the actual image of Jesus after his crucifixion.
We are talking about genetic signatures from rare plants and ancient organisms that create a map of a journey spanning thousands of miles. The crazy part is that this DNA suggests the cloth has been in places history says it never went. This is not just a relic anymore. It is a biological puzzle that is starting to reveal its most controversial secrets right now. Beyond human DNA. The results showed that the shroud is covered in DNA from all over the world. We are talking about genetic material from people in Europe, the Middle East, and even India. But the thing that really made the scientists stop in their tracks was the non-human DNA. The shroud is packed with chloroplast DNA from plants that do not grow in Italy. Some of these plants are found in the desert, while others are native to the Americas. This is a key detail because the shroud was supposed to be in Europe long before anyone from there even knew the Americas existed. The crazy part is that these plant sequences are so complex and varied that they suggest the cloth was not just sitting in a box. It was a living, breathing object that traveled the world. See, the DNA reveals that this cloth has been handled by hundreds. It's maybe thousands of different people. But the non-human part is where it gets really weird. They found DNA from spruce trees, Mediterranean clovers, and even high-altitude plants from the mountains of Asia. It is almost as if the shroud was a magnet for every environment it passed through. But here is the catch. If this is a medieval fake from the 1300s, how did it get DNA from plants that live thousands of miles away in places Europeans had not visited yet? It is not that simple, though. Some skeptics say it is just contamination from modern tourists, but the way the DNA is degraded tells a different story. These genetic fragments are old. They are broken down in a way that happens over centuries, not days. The researchers also found human DNA that belongs to very specific ethnic groups. They identified sequences from the Middle East and North Africa, which fits the traditional story. But they also found a lot of DNA from the Druze community, a small and ancient group living in the mountains of Israel and Lebanon. This points to the shroud spending a massive amount of time in the exact area where the story of the man on the cloth began. But then, you have the DNA from India. How does a burial cloth from Jerusalem end up with genetic signatures from the Indian subcontinent? This is a key detail that suggests the shroud traveled along the Silk Road or was handled by people who moved between these empires. The sheer volume of different DNA types makes the shroud one of the most biologically complex objects ever studied in a lab, and that is putting it lightly. The more they sequence, the more they find. They even found DNA from different types of birds and insects trapped in the weave. It is like a biological snapshot of the last 2,000 years. What most people do not realize is that the DNA is not just on the surface, it is embedded deep inside the linen fibers. This means the cloth was exposed to these environments for a long time. It was not just a quick trip. The non-human DNA is so prevalent that it almost drowns out the human signatures in some samples. This has led some people to wonder if the shroud was ever actually a burial cloth or if it was something else entirely. But the bloodstains tell a much more violent story. The genetic map was about to lead them to a place no one expected. When you look at the DNA map of the Shroud of Turin, you are not just looking at a relic, you are looking at a map of human migration. The researchers found human mitochondrial DNA that belongs to haplogroups found primarily in Western Eurasia and the Near East. This is exactly what you would expect from something that started in Jerusalem and ended up in Italy. But get this. They also found a rare haplogroup that is almost exclusively found in Tibet. This makes zero sense if the cloth never left the Mediterranean region. It suggests that the shroud, or at least the people who owned it, had connections to the Far East that history has completely forgotten. The crazy part is the way the plant DNA matches these locations. They found DNA from a plant called Gundelia tournefortii. This is a thorny plant that grows almost exclusively in the deserts of the Middle East. Many people believe this could be the plant used for the crown of thorns. Finding its DNA on the cloth is a huge boost for the people who believe the shroud is real. But then researchers also found DNA from the Americas. Specifically, they found genetic markers from a type of black locust tree that is native to North America. If the shroud is from the Middle Ages, this should be impossible. It implies the cloth was either traveling in the late 1500s or it was contaminated in a very specific way. So, here is the deal. The DNA is not just telling us where the cloth has been, it is telling us who was touching it. They found DNA from people of North African descent, East African descent, and even South Chinese descent. This means the shroud was likely displayed in places where global travelers gathered. It was a focal point for pilgrims from every corner of the known world. But it also shows that the shroud was not kept in a sterile environment. It was out in the world, soaking up the biology of every city it visited. This is why the non-human DNA is so important. It acts like a GPS for the shroud's history. The researchers at the University of Padua who led this study were careful not to jump to conclusions. They knew that DNA can be a messy thing to study. Contamination is always a huge risk with something this old, but the pattern they saw was not random. It followed the historical roots of the Byzantine Empire and the Crusades. The DNA from the Middle East and the Caucasus region is particularly strong, which aligns with the theory that the shroud was kept in Constantinople before it was brought to France and eventually Italy. But the non-human DNA remains the biggest mystery of all. Why is there so much of it, and why is it so diverse? The crazy part is that even with all this data, we still do not have the DNA of the man on the shroud. They found a Y chromosome which confirms the blood on the cloth came from a male. But the DNA is so fragmented and mixed with other people's genetic material that we cannot get a clean profile. It is like trying to read a book where every page has been shredded and mixed with 10 other books. What we do have, though, is proof that the shroud is a global traveler. It has been exposed to more environments and more people than almost any other object in existence. This biological complexity is exactly what makes it so hard to dismiss as a simple fake. But the secrets of the blood were hiding something even more controversial. Testing the red stains. For a long time, skeptics said the red stains on the Shroud of Turin were just red ochre or tempera paint. They argued that a medieval artist simply painted the image to fool people. But science has moved past that. Chemical analysis of the stains has confirmed that they are made of real human hemoglobin. And get this, the blood is high in something called bilirubin. In the medical world, high bilirubin levels are a clear sign of extreme physical trauma. When someone is tortured or severely dehydrated, their liver starts to fail and bilirubin floods their bloodstream. The stains on the shroud are exactly what you would see if you took a blood sample from someone who had just been through an execution. But here is the catch. The blood stains are not just smeared on the cloth. They are anatomically perfect. They show exactly how blood would flow from a wound in the side or from nails in the wrists. Remember, in the Middle Ages, people did not even know how the circulatory system worked. They thought blood just sat in the body like water in a bag. An artist from the 1300s would have had to be a medical genius to get the blood flow patterns this accurate. And the DNA confirms it. The stains contain both serum and clotted blood, which only happens when a body has been dead for a short period. This is a key detail that suggests the cloth actually held a real person who had suffered a violent end.
The Shroud of Turin is this amazing relic. At bottom, it's a piece of cloth. It shows a very faint sort of image of a crucified man. And the crucified man calls us to remember Jesus' death and resurrection.
The crazy part is that the image of the man itself is not made of blood or paint. It is a mystery of its own. When you look at the shroud under a microscope, you see that the image only sits on the very top layer of the linen fibers. It did not soak in. It is not a liquid stain. It is more like a scorch mark. But there is no evidence of heat. Scientists have tried to recreate this using lasers and high-voltage electricity, and they still cannot get it quite right. The DNA on the cloth is surrounded by this unexplained image, which makes the whole thing feel like a high-tech crime scene from 2,000 years ago. Researchers also compared the DNA and blood on the shroud to another famous relic called the Sudarium of Oviedo. This is a smaller cloth that is said to have covered the head of Jesus. When they tested the blood on the Sudarium, they found it was type AB. Then they tested the shroud. It was also type AB. This blood type is very rare in the general population, but much more common among people of Middle Eastern descent. The DNA from both cloths shows fragmented sequences that match the same geographic origins. It is not that simple, though, because the Sudarium does not have an image on it. It only has blood. But the fact that the blood types match and the DNA points to the same region is a massive coincidence if they are both fakes. The crazy part is that the blood on the shroud is still red. Normally, old blood turns brown or black as it oxidizes, but the high bilirubin content from the trauma keeps it looking red for a much longer time. This is a biological fact that medieval forgers could not have possibly known. It adds a layer of realism to the shroud that is hard to explain away with just paint and brushes. The DNA found in these bloodstains is old and broken, which is exactly what scientists expect from ancient samples. They are not finding fresh DNA from the 1970s. They are finding sequences that have been sitting there for a very, very long time. Yet the latest tests were about to turn the entire timeline upside down. In 1988, the three famous labs did radiocarbon dating on a small piece of the shroud. They all came back with the same result. The cloth was from between 1260 and 1390.
Carbon-14 dating gave a result of a date range of 1260 to 1390, which, if the carbon date is correct, would indicate that the shroud is only 700 years old.
For a while, the world thought the mystery was solved. The shroud was just a medieval fake. But here is the deal. Recent studies in 2024 and 2025 have used new technology called wide-angle X-ray scattering. This technique looks at how the cellulose in the linen has aged over time. And the results were a total shock. They suggest that the linen is actually 2,000 years old, placing it exactly in the time of the 1st century. This new data changes how we look at the DNA. If the cloth is 2,000 years old, then the complex DNA from all over the world makes even more sense. It has had 2 millennia to collect genetic signatures from every empire that rose and fell. The crazy part is that the 1988 test might have been done on a piece of the cloth that was repaired in the Middle Ages. DNA analysis of that specific corner showed that it had different characteristics than the rest of the shroud. This is a key detail because it means the most famous scientific proof against the shroud might have been a huge mistake. Now, scientists are looking at the shroud with fresh eyes. They are using AI to analyze the image and the DNA fragments to see if they can find more hidden patterns. What most people do not realize is that the shroud is essentially a piece of data. Every fiber holds information about the climate, the people, and the biology of the past. The fact that they found DNA from the Americas still bothers a lot of researchers, but some suggest it might have come from the hands of world travelers who visited the shroud after it was brought to Europe. But the DNA from the Middle East remains the most consistent and strongest signal in the entire cloth. Do you think the DNA evidence finally proves the shroud is real, or is it just the ultimate historical mess? Is there a piece of the puzzle we are still missing? Subscribe for more.